Hello, everyone. It's Adam Caplan and Andrew DiCecco here for Inside the Birds, a special pre-Super Bowl edition where we're going to discuss the injuries, give you an update on what we know, what it looks like going forward. Andrew, so glad to have you here as we get closer, yes, closer to the Super Bowl.
Likewise, Adam. Always great to talk to you. And we are, you and I and Jeff, we're going to be there for another Super Bowl, our second one in 3 years.
All right, so I want to actually pick up what you just said. So your first Super Bowl was 2 years ago as a media member? Is that
Yes,
the first one?
Super
Okay,
Bowl 57. Yep.
right, and this is 59. So what was that experience like for you?
It was unreal. We're on Radio Row, we're doing shows every day. You don't know who you're going to run into. Everybody's scrambling around trying to book guests. I run into Brett Michaels, the lead singer of Poison, and I like Poison. So I was able to talk to him. And I think it's just really good from our perspective to network and continue to maybe you see people you haven't seen in a year and you're able to kind of circle back and really establish those relationships. But yeah, it was a whirlwind, and we all were doing yeoman's work there that week.
Yeah, that was a long day. But it's enjoyable. It'll be certainly a great week. So, as we turn the page now, so you were in the locker room. You've been able to dissect everything. I know you and Jeff Mosher had a show on Monday, a quick update on kind of what things look like, just from an overall standpoint. So, when you take a look at this is going to be interesting. So, when you take a look at what you recall of being in the locker room after they won the championship game, leading into that bye week, then the Super Bowl, then where we are now. How are things different from that football team to this one?
I think this one's even closer. And this is a team that actually had to overcome certain bouts of adversity, whereas the 2022 season, if you can remember back, they kind of just steamrolled the NFL. But I think this team is wired a little bit differently. I think Nick Sirianni has learned and grown a lot from the 2022 season. And I also think that they have coordinators in place that are sort of trending towards the times. And maybe not so much for Vic, but I think Vic has proven that he has a counterpunch to what teams are looking to do. So I think collectively, and I also look at the player development standpoint, you see a lot more of that going on. So I think this is a far more complete team than the one in 22, and that was a really strong team in of itself.
Plus, this team is much younger, which I know when you and I were in training camp, we were trying to figure out what this team would look like. We knew they'd be good. I think you and I had the same record. What was it, 11-6?
Yes.
And I gave them an upside of 14. I just was like, okay, well, they look to be more athletic. They don't look slow anymore. It looks like the coaching staff's better. But then when you go through, and I know their schedule is much easier than last year, but when you go in the way that they've been winning, it was cool this last game, Andrew, because of Hurts' inconsistency. Then he gets it together again, like he did similar to the Pittsburgh game, and then Barkley went off again. It's one of these things you don't know till you get there, and then when you see it, and you mentioned Vic Fangio and what he's done. To me, I think this point and a half line I think is very fair. What are your thoughts on all that with the point spread at 1.5?
I think it's fair. I think it's fair. And I would take it a step further. I would say that the Eagles have the cheat code and what I believe to be one of the best offensive lines put together, at least in recent memory. And of course, Saquon Barkley. Remember when they went back in 22, there was Miles Sanders, and he doesn't
Right.
have nearly the game breaking ability of a Saquon Barkley. Saquon doesn't get tackled quite as easily, and he's just a special player, Adam. And I think in those type of games, going against Patrick Mahomes and that high-powered Chiefs team that feels like anytime they have the ball, they can score, having someone like Saquon Barkley on your side always gives them a chance.
All right, and so let's turn our attention to these injuries. We did an injury update, a quick one last week, well prior to the game, and let's get started with the Eagles. So, Kenny Gainwell, I know you told us when we did the post game show that you saw Gainwell in the locker room. He's got a concussion, and you've covered Will Shipley for us for your diary. So we know if Gainwell is not ready, it's going to be Will Shipley backing up Barkley. Let's turn our attention to Will Shipley, who obviously he got a chance to play because the Eagles were blowing him out. Did a great job. Also had the great kickoff return. So if Gainwell couldn't play for any reason, now we know the concussions are typically the players usually get cleared within a week.
Mm-hmm.
So let's assume that for now that he gets even though he should get cleared, right? But let's say he doesn't get cleared for some reason. You've seen Shipley, you've seen him up close. You know him better than anyone, any reporter out there. If Shipley had to be the number 2 running back, what could we expect from him?
Well, he does have some more juice than Kenny Gainwell does. He's a good receiver. And one thing that he always makes sure of, he goes, when I go in there, the first thing in my mind is to protect the football, guard it with your life.
Mm.
So ball security is something you can expect from him. But I also think he has, and yesterday might not be the best example with that 57-yarder that he couldn't quite seal the deal on. He does have more of a home run hitting type of ability. But Kenny Gainwell is a lot better as a pass protector. I think that would be a tall ask for a rookie to step in there and be able to fulfill that role. And that's something that I think Gainwell does that's sort of taken for granted. But Will is equipped to do it. He has a good rapport with that whole running back room. Honestly, it's very tight. They're really close together. And I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but if for some reason Gainwell couldn't go, the running back who would be elevated to be the third would be Ty Davis Price.
What do you know about Ty Davis Price? I know you've talked about him before.
Yeah, I know quite a bit about him. He's another guy that I talk to every now and then, check in, see how he's doing. He runs downhill. He's gotten a lot better in terms of just his shiftiness, ball security. In training camp, he had the case of the drops at times and a couple of bouts with fumbles, but he's a player that I very much enjoy talking to. He's matured, he's developed, and he's somebody that I think the Eagles really like. You saw that he got a few carries in the season finale, or maybe it was the Dallas game, but I think that they're happy with where his development is.
And another guy that I know you've covered pretty closely is Britton Covey, the 2023 best punt returner. Unfortunately, he had the shoulder blade fracture, came back from that, then had the neck injury. We know he started working last week. Andrew, what can you tell us about this guy who you and I saw in training camp? He had that one day, that Saturday was a Britton Covey day, probably the first or second Saturday in training camp. But then, obviously he is missed most of the season with these injuries. So what can you tell us about Britton Covey's situation?
Yeah, and obviously to your point, he's a trusted target for JalenHurts. Jalen has a lot of confidence in Britton Covey. Britton's always where he needs to be. Now, the injury was sustained against the Baltimore Ravens on a punt return.
Hmm.
And when you're dealing with any sort of a neck injury, you obviously have to be cleared for contact. And that's not something that, even if you are practicing, because he was a full participant in practice, but it's a lot different when you're going into a live game and you have to worry about the health and safety of a player taking a hit and being able to withstand that. And I just think that that's something that they're not going to gamble with unless they're 100% sure that he's going to be equipped to handle a tackle in a live NFL game. So I don't get the sense that they're in a rush to do that. Now, Britton Covey, having him back there helps the Eagles tremendously in terms of those hidden yards, right? That's something that Britton's talked to me a lot about. That's something that Michael Clay, the special teams coordinator, talks a lot about, hidden yards and how that impacts a game. His ball security is exceptional. I think he does a really good job of having that situational awareness. And the main point is that Cooper DeJean is far too important to the defense to subject him to those hits. I mean, all it takes is some of those helmet to helmet hits, and you've lost your nickel corner.
That's right. So the next one is Landon Dickerson, who started at center for Cam Jurgens. Dickerson was limited to 39 snaps, 55% of the snaps, because this knee injury, this is his second knee injury of the season. So from your vantage point, sitting in the press box, how do you think he did before the injury? What did you notice with the knee injury, if anything?
I thought Landon did a really nice job. And honestly, it was the block that I saw on the first play from scrimmage where he's pulling to his left on that 60-yard Saquon Barkley touchdown that really stood out to me. Landon is quickly becoming one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL. And it's rare to say that about a guard, but his ability to just be so dominant at the point of attack, and he's a highly intelligent player. And I just think his impact really, radiates throughout the whole offensive line. But I thought he did a nice job holding his own at the point of attack. He obviously is very strong and powerful, and there's not much that you could throw his way that he's not going to be able to do. Now, we'll have to find out about the severity of that knee issue. I saw him in the locker room. I saw him walking off the field. So we'll have to see that. Now they have a couple of weeks to really gauge that. But I honestly think that Cam Jurgens, that was a really gutsy performance by him. He played 27 snaps. He clearly was he was active to be a break glass in case of an emergency type of situation. He went out there. I thought he moved fairly well considering the situation. He got to the second level. He made some nice blocks. We could clearly see after the game, Adam, that that back issue was sort of hindering him. You can see him a little bit hunched over and things like that.
Yeah, and he did next to nothing on Friday. So that's backs and offensive linemen. Jeff and I were talking about that. They don't mix well. Their back injuries are probably the most common for upper body. A lot of the time, it's back injuries for linemen. So you're always worried about that. But you're getting him treatment, getting him ready to go for next week. That's going to be a big deal. I did want to ask you, this was surprising that they had Brett Toth over Nick Gates. I understand from what I was told, Nick Gates is way better at guard than center, but even so, he could play two positions. Were you surprised that they had Toth over him?
Not entirely. To expand on that, Nick Gates has been really a weekly inactive. Even in game they slide Dickerson over. But Brett Toth is somebody who you can argue the degree of which he can play any of those positions, but he can play tackle, he can play guard, he can play center. He pretty much was a guard primarily throughout training camp. But there is a lot of trust that the team has in Brett Toth. Jeff Stoutland raves about him. That's somebody that he thinks very highly of. And I just think that the Eagles felt more comfortable there. And he was taking snaps during pregame warmups, Brett Toth, even though he's primarily a guard at this point. But I just think there's a little bit more. If he had to be pressed into service, I believe that the team feels that he can capably navigate a snap or two versus someone like Nick Gates. That's just my assessment of it.
Yeah, and he's been a Jeff Stoutland special, man. He on and off the roster a number of times for many years. I remember when the Eagles cut him, they didn't think the Cardinals would claim him off waivers. That was a stunner. But they got him back, and he's a guy that Stout likes. That's why he's here. So
You could tell that he really hones in on the fundamentals. And I forget who he was working with. It was either Bryce Huff or Jay Looks Hunt in the locker room where they were kind of like going over like a certain move. And yeah, it just seems like he has a really firm grasp on that, and that he likes sort of going through the finer details of the position.
yeah, in fact, he's been cross-trained at every position: guard, right tackle, left tackle, and center. So yeah, the positional versatility, certainly Stout loves it. Let's go to defense. We know Nakobe Dean done, left patella tendon. The patellar, man, that is a worse injury than ACL. We've talked about this before. It's not the death knell from years ago when it take a year to come back. Sometimes players don't come back, but it's not that bad anymore. It's still bad, but it's not like a career ender like before. So Aaron Burks, I wasn't totally sure because you and I know this. He missed a lot of training camp with that knee
Mhm.
injury. It wasn't really a factor early in the season. What do you think of Burks so far?
So real quick on Nakobe Dean. Before that, Nakobe was not there yesterday. He had recently had surgery. He actually
Okay.
went out to Los Angeles. Dr. Neil, he's this renowned surgeon, and he did Kobe, he did
Oh,
Saquon, Otani,
okay.
and
Oh,
that's
was
the
it
same.
Attache?
Yes, that's it.
Trash?
That's
No,
exactly
Atrash. Was it Neil Atrash? I thought he does
that's
short.
exact.
Okay.
That's who it was. And then he also did Van Sumeren surgery. So,
Oh, interesting.
so
Okay.
yes, so that happened recently. So that's why he wasn't there. But Oren Burks is a player that, and I've gotten asked about him quite a bit. Every time I talk to him, I always come away really, really impressed with how intelligent he is in terms of how he sees the game. Kind of like a James Bradbury, just understanding where to be, being assignment sound, you could just see he exudes leadership. So, I mean, I've been very impressed with what I've seen from him, and I'm not really surprised. He had to sort of work through some of those growing pains going against the Green Bay Packers where they targeted him. But against the Rams, you saw his instincts really take shape. And I think as the more he works with Zach Bowen, you see them a little bit more cohesive.
Yeah, the communication has been a big deal. You know what's interesting as we discuss this, and in the Chiefs, and we'll talk about them in a couple minutes, but the depth on the Eagles team has been remarkable because again, it's you don't really know till you get there. You think you might know, but until they actually play, you don't know. You just mentioned how good Burks has been for them. This is a good story because this is a guy that's who's been around, started a number of games in his career. Had to play
Super Bowl
last year.
last year. He started the
Yep.
Super Bowl.
Yeah, he got thrown in there after Greenlaw tore his Achilles. So yeah, that's it's a big deal. Yeah, that was a really underrated signing. You know, the guy's as you know, he's a tall dude for an inside back or one of the taller
Yeah.
guys.
And very rarely do you have a third linebacker that's played in over 100 games.
Wow.
So if there were ever, I guess, a position where the Eagles they were better equipped to have somebody step in, it would be linebacker because he's played in a number of different systems. Remember, he was with the Green Bay Packers and, of course, the 49ers, and he just plays the game. You could just see his football IQ when he's out there.
All right, so we just talked about Dean and the final one. Well, because he's not saying he won't play is the great Brandon Graham with he had the torn left triceps, went on IR week 13, had surgery within a week after that. on his show on Monday night on IP, he didn't roll it out. He said it's up to the docs. And what I found interesting, and I get it, he's not rehabbing an ACL injury. It's with that left arm, you have to be able to use it. So I've learned with this stuff, Andrew, for covering the NFL for 27 years, you never cut down a guy's will to play, and particularly a game like this. If he could at all contribute, and if the docs clear him, maybe he has a very limited role this game. He's got to have power in that left arm. He's got to be able to tackle, grab,
Push
and do
off, disengage from blocks.
exactly.
The Eagles always talk about block destruction. If you can't do that, that severely inhibits his ability because he's a very effective run defender.
Oh, unbelievable! It's funny you say that because that was the first thing that I learned about him back once he got over his ACL and tendon injury. In fact, that was the thing that surprised us when we had when we had the guy who used to be the assistant trainer for the Eagles, whose name Aaron Borgman, who said actually it wasn't just an ACL. He also had a torn patella, which is crazy. Think about that.
Wow.
Yeah, I was stunned when he said that. I'm like, how the hell did he come back from that? But yeah, he actually became very early in his career, kind of like Josh Sweat, a very good run defender. And then year after year after year after year, it isn't. And you were at that game in Los Angeles with when they played the Rams the first time this year. How great was he in person in that game when he got hurt?
Amazing. It was one of those things you're like, he's having the best game of the season. And then, of course, when we get to the locker room and we all go to Brandon Graham, he says it right then and there. He goes, I tore my tricep. And initially, it's like, really? He goes, I'm out for the season. And I'll never forget just coming away impressed with the way that he took the injury. He was still smiling. He was like, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be a good leader, this and that. But you could see the smile yesterday, and he's always lighthearted, but I have to think he's going to be chomping at the bit and doing everything that he can to try and lobby for being available for a Super Bowl. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that will be in the cards. Like you said, there's a lot of obstacles that come with the injury that he had playing the position that he plays, and I guess we're gonna find out here.
Yeah, and Nick Sirianni will be talking about it with the media on Tuesday. Now, for the Chiefs, the only guy they've lost for the season, it was a big one at the time. It's definitely a big one. It's Rashee Rice, who was projected to be their top receiver. They had in Hollywood Brown. He had a very serious injury, the sternoclavicular I want to say it correct injury, which kept him out for majority of the season. He actually came back a little bit earlier. It's worse than a clavicle. It's actually a very serious injury. He came back for the final few weeks of the regular season, and then it's been there. You saw him in the championship game make a couple plays. Obviously, the D Hop trade at the trade deadline. So they have depth. And Xavier Worthy, I want to bring him up because we're going to be obviously he's a big factor now. It's interesting, Andrew, because we've always thought him as a deep threat. We know he could run, but they're not really using him that way. That's what I found so surprising so far.
No, quick hitters, sometimes intermediary routes. He's sort of developing a little bit different than I thought it would pan out. I thought he would be an immediate deep threat, somebody that was going to sort of take the league by storm in that regard. And I mean, who knows? We know that he has
Yep.
otherworldly speed, and that could be a talking point. I have a feeling it will be leading into Super Bowl Sunday.
You know what's amazing before we move on here is Patrick Mahomes. He suffers this right high ankle sprain. Now, there are two types of high ankle sprains. There's the 6 to 8 week variety, which is your garden variety, the serious one. There's what we call a mild high ankle, where if you're a receiver, you're not playing for a couple weeks. If you're an offensive lineman, you could play. And Patrick Mahomes, this is not the first time he's had a high ankle sprain and play with it. Guy's unbelievable. He's listed on the injury report every week. He plays well. He played very well in the championship game. So here we are, man. 2 years ago, two same teams. Isn't this just so crazy? Now, let me ask you this question. Do you feel the hype? 2 years ago, obviously, it was Andy Reid for the first time. Are you feeling the hype this time?
I think it's a little early, not yet so far, but
Sure.
I have to tell you, being there for that press conference where Jalen, at the end of the Super Bowl, I don't think I've ever seen a player more downtrodden than I saw Jalen Hurts, almost to the point of that was going to stay with him through his career. And I don't think he'll be truly satisfied until he gets that win. He's so competitive. Everything he works toward is to win the Super Bowl. And what better theater than going against the team that really that sent him home and a couple years ago.
Did you notice anything in the locker room after the game?
A lot of confidence and a lot of poise. Like that is a lethal combination for a team that just hung 55 points on the Commanders. To have that kind of mindset, to not be looking too far ahead, to kind of be present in that moment, and that's been really a theme throughout the season. I just think that Jalen, it all starts with Nick and Jalen just exudes confidence and poise, and he's always very composed.
One thing before we get out of here. So you just mentioned Sirianni and Hurts, and we know the relationship last year was sort of fractured. It wasn't great. Anything you could tell last year? Because I know a lot's been written about it, but anything you
Yeah,
could ever tell last year?
nothing that was on the surface that you could
Okay,
definitely tell. You don't necessarily see them talking a whole bunch on the sideline, but other than that, there wasn't anything really apparent that you could glean from that, other than maybe comments here or there, depending on how you interpret them. But
sure.
what a difference a year makes.
Yeah, it is true. No doubt. And here they are once again, 8 years, three Super Bowl appearances. They've won one. They're going for their second one. Andy Reid trying to get the first repeat in NFL history. It's pretty amazing, to be honest with you. And I think the line at 1.5 is very, very fair. It's going to be on a neutral field. Not only is it a
Mm-hmm.
neutral field, which it always is at the Super Bowl, but we don't have to worry about being outside. You're not worried about the elements. You're not worried about the slipping. You know, I don't know if we've talked, you and I have talked about this. When you were at that game 2 years ago, were you like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah, it looked like they were. It looked like Woolman's Ice Rink in New York City. I was like, "What's going on here?" Nobody was able to keep their balance. They just kept falling down. I never seen anything like it. But then you looked. I remember looking up and you see State Farm Stadium, and they had the roof open, and it's sort of obviously it is not necessarily iced over, but it was slick surface by the time the game was in the third or fourth quarter.
Sure, sure. All right, good stuff, Andrew. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you as this week progresses. Stay tuned for more of Andrew's work at InsideTheBirds.com. And I know we've got a ton going on here, Andrew. We love your work, love having you. And
Likewise.
folks, yep, thank you so much. And we'll see you later this week. Thank you.